So we're here for the Q&A with Deputy Majority Leader Senator Gianaris. So I just want to give a quick shout out to all the folks that have participated, have submitted their questions and everything leading up to this point. I will start the first question and then I'll pass it off to the folks that are asking questions. And I just want to make a note about the questions that are being asked. We got a lot of questions submitted. And so we had to choose which ones were going to be chosen to reflect all of the questions that were asked. So we kind of merged some together. So please be patient. I will ask the first question, as I said, and then I'll pass it off, but I don't want to do that before I actually allow Senator Gianaris to give some opening remarks. Thank you so much for being here, and go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What a tremendous crowd you have on a Friday night, on a nice night as well. It's a testament to how important the issue is and the great organizing work that all of you done. So thank you, Gio, for the introduction, and thank you, New Yorker News, for all the great work you're doing. Look, we have, as most of you know, we took the majority in the state Senate in 2019, and we told everyone that would bring a sea change to New York, and I think we've proven that correct, but we've done a lot and we still have a lot more to do. One of the things we did in our first few months in the majority was pass the CLCPA, which is a nation-leading effort to combat the climate crisis. And we are working towards making sure it's now implemented correctly, because the goals are ambitious, and we're already seeing right here in my backyard in Astoria, we're fighting a plant that a company wants to build that would be a new fossil fuel plant. We're like, how can you build a new fossil fuel plant when we're supposed to be moving away from fossil fuel plants everywhere? So they're still trying, and we have to continue to fight. But that's not all we did. Just this past budget that we did last week, we're going to get that Environmental Bond Act on the ballot, and we're not going to allow the governor to decide to remove it from the ballot like they did last year. So now it is locked in to be voted on by the people next year. And we're optimistic that the public supports efforts at furthering the cause of the environment. And something that I fought very hard, the city council, to their credit, passed local law 97 down here in the city, which requires buildings to retrofit and conform to a more environmental and green footprint. And lo and behold, big real estate developers tried to get the state to overturn it. It's the old playbook they used to use. They used to go to the governor and the Senate Republicans, and they would get things that they didn't like that the city did flipped around. Well, they made a mistake. They didn't think about the fact that the Senate is now in Democratic hands and in progressive Democratic hands. So we didn't let that happen. The governor proposed it like he was supposed to for them. But we didn't play along, and together with our colleagues in the assembly, we fought that back, and it got removed from the final budget. So the city law stays in place, and those requirements still exist at the city level. You think they would have learned their lesson after the rent laws we did, but that's another story for another time. But we are in a new age in the state legislature and the Senate especially. And one of the next steps we need to take as it relates to the climate crisis and the environment is CCIA. And that is an important provision to help us reach the goals of the CLCPA and do so in a way that also provides resources for communities to be compliant, to be green, and to do a lot of the things that we would like them to do. And so we're going to work on it. We have, I think it's 2 months from now, but a month and a half worth of session, because we're not in next week, to get it done. And we just need to roll up our sleeves and have one more celebration on top of the other ones we've had for all the accomplishments we've achieved. But I'm happy to take the questions. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Senator Gianaris. And I'm so ready for that celebration. We're celebrating tonight our week of action, but when that CCIA passes, listen, it's going to be a celebration for sure. And I'm ready to bask in that with all of us here and hundreds and thousands more across the state. So to your remarks, Senator Gianaris, we've just talked about, Kelly and Zava just ran us through the remarkable week of action that New Yorker News and Indivisible we're wrapping up right now, right? We had over 50 lobby visits in the state, on the state level, 10 on the federal level. We had dozens of rallies, hundreds of phone calls, a kickoff with over 200 folks with our state Senate and Assembly majority, or sponsors, my apologies, right? And now we have 600 people on this call on a Friday night in the midst of the beginning of spring, right? Where y'all could be anywhere else, but y'all are on this call. So shout out once again to y'all, to all of us. And as we are building on the grassroots movement that we've created, right, to be able to pass the CCIA, demanding climate, jobs, and justice, I'm wondering what we can expect from you within the state Senate this year so that passing the CCIA is a reality.
Yep, it's a good question. And this, first of all, again, credit to you and the organizing, because that's a big part of it. We have to work in partnership, and that's what we saw. We just came through a budget that was the best budget I've seen since I've been a part of this government. And it was because those of us on the inside who are allies were working with the organizers on the outside, and we got it done. Now, let me tell you something. The Invest in Our New York folks did tremendous work, but I don't remember being on a call with 600 people on a Friday night with them. So you guys are doing something special here, and if we can keep that pressure on, work with the sponsors. Obviously, we need votes, right? I can't snap my fingers and make this happen. It's every one of these issues that we've achieved has been hard fought, even with our majority. It's required a lot of organizing, and there's a lot of strength in the opposition, even amongst them talking to some of our members. And obviously, the governor has not been the best ally on some of these things. So we are going to do what we always do and what we've done successfully for going on 2.5 years now, which is work the process, work the members, and get to the point where we get it to the floor and get it passed. And so we don't have a lot of time. You're right about that. But it's certainly something that can be done. I know the number of sponsors on the bill has increased dramatically just this year. And so I don't know, we had 18 now, something like that, if I remember correctly, higher than that. Good. Because what we need is 32. that's the majority of the Senate. You get that kind of number of sponsors on the bill, it becomes very hard to for the leadership to resist putting it on the floor for a vote. And so that's what I would say would be the very short-term goal in the next couple of weeks, see if we can get to that number. And then that makes the argument for those of us on the inside easier to say, well, there's no argument we don't have the votes. There's no argument we don't support this because we have that many sponsors on the bill. And so I'm happy to work with you on that to get it done. Let's just spend the next few weeks doing it.
Thank you, Senator. And just to be clear with everybody on the call, we have a third of the Senate already co-sponsoring the CCIA. So that momentum is being built and will continue to be built in order for the CCIA to pass, and it will. So next up, I do want to pass it off to Catherine with Triage to introduce herself and to ask the next question.
Hi, my name is Catherine Giosa. I'm with Triage, a youth-led organization, and I was just wondering, what is your plan to ensure that youth have an equitable seat at the table in the decision-making process for where funds are being allocated?
Well, what we got to do is keep the provision of the bill in place that requires someone under the age of 26 to sit on the board. It's the first time I've ever seen something like that, where you set up these boards to govern over new processes. For example, we just set up Office of Cannabis Management for the marijuana stuff, and the CCIA calls for such a board to be created. And you often have requirements. Some people from this part of the state, some people from that part of the state, different demographics represented. I haven't really seen one that required a member of a youthful generation to be part of it, but this bill does that. It requires someone under the age of 26 to be part of the governing body that would administer this. So as we move forward to get this bill done, we have to make sure that provision doesn't fall off and we keep it there.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Senator. Next, we're going to pass it off to Nancy Higgins.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, how are you? My name is Nancy Higgins, and I'm a nurse, also the treasurer of the largest union in the New York State Nurses Association. A news book today about Amazon workers in Alabama, where they were intimidated into not forming a union. This was truly disheartening to so many people. As a proud union nurse, I know how life-changing unions can be for members that form them. The Thrive Act seeks to create 15 million good green jobs. How do we ensure that these jobs are union jobs and do not just add to a decline in the labor movement? How would you be able to help us?
Thank you for that question, Nancy. First of all, thank you and your colleagues for what you've done over the last year. It has been incredible to watch nurses in action, putting themselves at risk and sacrificing for the rest of us to be safe. So before we talk about anything else, thank you for that. And your question's a good one. I believe the bill, again, has labor protections in it because anything we're doing that requires essentially a whole new industry to be born, we want it to be done correctly, and we want it to be done in a way that doesn't harm workers, but enhances them. You know, I've been an adversary of Amazon's for quite some time now, and so I was also rooting for the workers down there. I just talked with Stuart Applebaum today, who's with the retail. We're off topic now, but just for a moment, who represents the union they were trying to join. And so they're going to challenge the results. I believe we'll see where that ends up going, but I'm certainly not going to allow a new law to be created of this importance without protecting the workforce.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy and Senator. Next, we're going to pass it off to Monica Weiss with 350 NYC to ask our next question.
Gio, I'm so sorry. I think it's actually Maddie, and the Monica question is for Senator Schumer.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Maddie. My apologies.
Hi, my name is Maddie Hamilton, and I am with Push Buffalo in Buffalo, New York. And here in Buffalo, we're fighting against environmental racism and classism and for a new kind of economy. So I'm wondering, how does this bill specifically target the intersectional goals of environmental justice and really the wrongs of environmental racism? And how does the bill provide for a just transition for the most vulnerable New Yorkers?
If you indulge me for a couple minutes, I'm going to tell you how I first ran for the State Assembly, which was my first office before I got to the Senate. Was because my neighborhood produces about 60% of New York City's electricity load. And lo and behold, most of the power plants that were spewing toxic fumes, because they're all fossil fuel plants, were right next to the Queensbridge housing development, which is the largest public housing development in the country. And so I've been fighting on the cause of environmental justice ever since then. We've had some success closing some plants down along the way, but it's an issue that's dear to me, so I appreciate the question. As I understand it, a lot of the resources, right, this bill would produce about $15 billion annually. And so the resources are then divided into various causes. I think some of it goes to education, some of it goes to green infrastructure, and a large chunk of it, I forget if it's 30 or 33%, goes to communities on the ground who have been impacted so that they can ameliorate the consequences of the environmental injustice that they've been experiencing all this time. So much like we did again on the marijuana law, it's fresh in my mind because we just did it, but we're requiring some of the resources generated from that to go back to communities who suffered under criminalization. This bill would require a lot of the resources generated to go into communities that have suffered from the effects of environmental hazards and pollution.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maddie, and apologies for the mix up there. This definitely feels and calls to my heart, again, being from the South Bronx and now being in Buffalo. Environmental racism and environmental classism pervades us everywhere. So thank you for that response, Senator Gianaris. Next, we're gonna go with Nan Faisler with Indivisible Harlem. Take it away, Nan.
Great, thank you very much. Again, Nan Faisler with Indivisible Harlem. Senator, thank you very much for being here this evening. You know, when we passed, or I should say you and the Senate and Assembly passed in 2019, the CLCPA, we didn't get everything that was in the original bill. What can you do as a leader in the New York State Senate to ensure that the new CCIA survives with all its key components intact? And second part of this is gets passed even if there is pushback by Governor Cuomo?
Well, first of all, let me correct you. It was we. You were right the first time, because there's no way we are. I was saying to someone the other day, we really are just vessels to channel your energies and your organizing into votes, because there can only be 63 of us, but there's millions of people that care about these issues. And your question, even though it had two parts, is really kind of the same question, because you're saying, how do we hold CCIA to the bill language and not let it be weakened? And then the second part was, if there's pushback from the governor. The reason it would be weakened is because of pushback from the governor. And so look, this is something we deal with on every issue. We just came through a budget that nobody thought we could pull off in the face of resistance from the governor. So we're learning more every day about how to assert our power, especially now that we have a supermajority, and how to work with our allies in the assembly. But one thing I've learned is, especially on non-budget items, which this would be, if we are teamed up with the assembly and both houses agree, it's very hard for the governor to push back. So I would say the first step on a purely legislative initiative like this is make sure the Senate holds the line, make sure the assembly holds the line, and then if we go in there together like that, we always have the threat of an override if he wants to veto it. So it just becomes much more likely that we hold as much of it as possible at that point.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nan, for the question and for just overall being a rock star within the New York News Coalition as a super volunteer. And thank you for that answer once again, Senator. Next, we're going to go with Alan Blair from Rochester. Please introduce yourself, Alan, and ask your question.
Hi, Alan Blair here from Citizens Climate Lobby, Rochester. Good to be here. One thing that we have seen with other pieces of climate funding is that it has been raided from its original purpose. What measures does the CCIA contain to make sure that the governor can't use the money collected from the polluter fee to fund projects he prefers?
Well, first of all, thank you and all your friends in Rochester for sending us two great senators in the majority now. We have Samra Brook and Jared McCooney, who are a great voice in our conference, great voices, I should say. You ask a difficult question, because the law contains, or the bill, I should say, contains provisions prohibiting raiding, right? It says this money is dedicated to this purpose and you can't use it for anything else. But a law can be superseded by another law. So there's for example, here in the city, the MTA, which is our transit agency that runs the subways and buses, has a dedicated fund that's not supposed to be raided. And the governor made a proposal in his budget. He was going to raid $150 million or so out of it. And we had to fight him off on it. Now, how can you do that? The law says you can't do it. Well, if we pass another law that says you can, then you can. So that's the risk. It's a constant fight unless it's in the Constitution, and then it has elevated importance. And you can't just overrule the Constitution with a statute. So unfortunately, I mean, we should and could put all these protections in the bill. It's in there. We should enact it into law that way. But we're going to have to fight that fight anytime the governor may want to try and raid it, because he can always overrule a law with another law.
Thank you. Appreciate your diligence.
Thank you so much, Alan. Our next question will come from Jesse Brill. So Jesse, please introduce yourself and let us know where you're at, and then ask your question.
Hi, I'm Jesse, she, her pronouns. I'm here in Syracuse, New York. So my question is that much of the conversation around agendas like CCIA has been centered around economic opportunities, which is of course incredibly necessary. But could some of the funding that is in this bill and other bills like it be allocated to improving living spaces, like providing access to parks and green space, more public transportation, and community-based conservation programs, especially in areas that don't currently have a whole lot of that, like in really urban areas?
Yeah, it's related to the answer I gave earlier on environmental justice issues. There is about a third of the funds that the CCIA would produce, which I guess would be about $5 billion, that would go to community groups specifically for projects in their communities, which could include access to green space. It could include public transportation improvements. It could include conservation programs. So there's a lot of initiatives that can come out of this that are not just economic opportunities. And kind of marrying the two answers, of that $5 billion that would come the bill also requires 70% of that money to go to disadvantaged communities. And so there would be an extra preference for that money to get spent in places that have suffered for years.
Great, thanks so much, Senator.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jesse and Senator. Next, we're going to pass it off to Sazu Scott with Our Climate. Sazu, please introduce yourself and where you're at and ask your question.
Hi, my name's Zazu. Along with my fellowship with Our Climate, I'm the political action organizer at Climate Justice Cornell. And at Climate Justice Cornell, we mobilized our base last spring to push Cornell to divest from fossil fuels. Now, this semester, we want to push our base to mobilize for the CCIA. So my question is, as organizers, what can we do to support the work that you're doing in the legislature to get this thing through in 2021?
Get me those sponsors we talked about. I think Gio said we're up to a third of the Senate now, so that's what, 20 something, 21, 22 or so sponsors. We need to get to 32. And so find someone who's not on there and lobby them to get on. If your own representatives are not on the bill, get them on the bill. Because once we get to 32, the nature of the conversation internally changes. I mean, we could certainly pass bills with fewer than 32 sponsors, but when you have it, no one can tell you don't have support to pass the bill because everyone's, there's enough public declaration of support to get it done at that point. So keep doing what you're doing. And I'm just talking about the Senate. Obviously, you got to do the same thing on the Assembly side. But what we need is more engaged support on the issue.
Thank you so much, Sazu, for your question, for being a rock star within the coalition, as so many that are here with us tonight. So I have a couple of questions that have come in since we have a little bit of extra time within our Q&A. So I'm going to post some of them. The first one being, and Senator, you touched on this a little bit in a previous question about 2 questions ago, but want you to go a little bit more in detail. What can we do to ensure communities facing the worst pollution and climate change are prioritized for funding under the CCIA?
Sure, I missed, you said, what can we do to make sure that the communities
that are facing the brunt of environmental racism, environmental classism, and climate change and pollution are prioritized for funding within the CCIA?
Well, the CCIA already requires it. We have to make sure that that language stays in the final version, and then it's a matter of how that money gets allocated, how they decide to allocate that money for which specific projects, and that goes back to the governing board we talked about. So the bill's been well thought out, and it's contemplated a lot of these things. It requires the money to be spent in a certain way. It requires it to be spent in certain communities. It requires the decision to be made by a representative group that represents all generations. All the different pieces that we've talked about tonight come together to, if it's working properly, make sure that the money's going where it's supposed to and for the right thing. So if we just hold the line and don't let the bill get watered down, we can achieve that.
Thank you for that. And so another question that we have is, what is winning messaging because the GOP will try to stop the CCIA?
I have a unique way of looking at that because we face that all the time. And we faced it on excluded workers, which we just did. We faced it on bail reform, which we did a couple of years ago. The fear of Republican attacks. And my view is the people of the state have spoken. They buried the Republicans deep in the minority in both houses, and we're here to govern based on that mandate. And we did that in our first term in 19 and 20, and they beat us up really good, especially on the bail stuff. You've probably all seen ads over the course of the last election. And we came out of it with 3 more seats and a supermajority. And so my attitude is the state is driving this conversation, not the Republican attacks, because they seem to be living couple of decades in the past, and they're continuing to scare people about immigrants. They continue to try and scare people about crime. These are things when I was growing up, they were using as political attacks. And I think to our credit, the people of the state have decided they don't buy it, and they keep returning us with bigger and bigger numbers. So I wouldn't worry too much about the attacks. You're going to hear them. It is what it is, but we just generally push through and get things done. I'm more concerned about criticisms from within, whether that's the governor or individual members of the legislature. That's much more harmful than anything the Republicans say.
Thank you for that. And I just want to note too, I heard a lot of what you said and reminds me of two things, both in the work that we're doing, we're shifting the narrative of what has been, what is to what will be and what can be. So I deeply appreciate that. And a grounding from movement generation, which is if we're not prepared to govern, we're not prepared to win. And so we are prepared to govern. We have an in-depth CCIA bill that really allocates the funding that will be charged to polluters in that way so that we can actually drive climate justice here in New York State and lead that to our federal level. So we have a couple.
I'm sorry, I was going to say one more thing because I love this topic because it's something it's kind of gets into political philosophy, which I like a lot. The problem is with the Democratic Party is there are a bunch of folks, generally older, who grew up in politics in the 80s and 90s, and they are living in this fear of Ronald Reagan, believe it or not. Like the guy was around 40 years ago. But he won the political debate of the 80s. And then the belief became, if you want to succeed politically, you have to be against taxes, against government, against all the things that we care about. Bill Clinton governed that way, right? And that's so people that are in that Bill Clinton school are these centrist Democrats who think, the era of big government is over. That was his big speech. And they are behind the times. And what's happening now is we're realizing that you can convince people with a powerful message and a powerful issue and a powerful organizing. And that's what's been happening. And so the Republicans are sitting there screaming and waving their pitchforks, but no one's buying it because we are speaking the truth and people are starting to get it. So you don't have to worry so much about who are you going to be attacked by. We have to worry more about who we're going to educate to get more support on our side. And that's what we've been doing. That's what we have to do on this issue to get it done.
Thank you so much for that. And I see the chat is blowing up. Folks are responding to that dialogue here. So kudos to everyone interacting in the chat, and thank you once again for being here. We have just 2 more questions for you, and then we'll take a short intermission before we get into the federal Q&A. So the next question is, what can we do to invest in public transit, specifically for communities upstate?
We restored a bunch of money that the governor was trying to raid from both the MTA and statewide funding. And so the state budget went a long way towards getting some of that done, but not enough. And part of the issue is you need engagement locally as well, right? So the city, you have the city bus and subway system, which is kind of this hybrid governing structure of state and city. And it's obviously the biggest system in the world, so it requires a lot of money, and that's always the fight there. But upstate communities need to focus on mass transit as well. I think federally, President Biden seems concerned about improving the mass transit infrastructure and train travel especially. We need to tap into that. They just pumped a tremendous amount of money into the state for mass transit needs. So hopefully some of that ends up in the right places.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm hoping too that with our very own Senator Tim Kennedy, who is the chair of the Transportation Committee, we can make those things happen. So just 2 more questions. I know I said 2 questions the last question, but really just 2 more. And then
right. I'm having a good time. This is good.
So how can we ensure that once the bill is passed, people can continue to make their voice heard in the implementation process?
Once the bill is passed, I like the optimism. This is good. You just got to not disband this group, which you won't, obviously. This is not just a CCIA group. It's a group that cares about the climate more broadly than that. And it requires diligence. So when something gets done, you need to have meetings like this and get 600 people on a Friday night to talk about the implementation of the new law and make sure that it's done correctly. You need to make sure that the people who are appointed to serve on that board are the right people, because that's going to be something we have to be mindful of as well. So just keep doing what you're doing, but we'll do it after the bill is passed as well.
Thank you so much. And I see in the chat to keep an eye on the CAC, which is the Climate Action Council, the board created by the CLCPA to create the scope and plan. So definitely right on. So one last question, Senator Gianaris, because we're here and we're trying to keep it as real as possible, both with our 600 plus folks that have joined. And as we're talking about co-sponsorship for the CCIA, I have noticed that you're not a sponsor yourself right now. So I'm wondering if you've submitted that and we just still haven't seen that, or when will you actually submit that?
That's the easiest question to answer. Yes, you know what's funny? As I was preparing for this call, I noticed I wasn't on it and I couldn't believe it. So I called my staff. I said, "Why am I not on the bill?" And they said, "I don't know. I think you were." And we put it in today is the short answer. But we thought I was already on it. And sometimes it just gets lost in the shuffle. But fear not. If you had whatever number you had before, you're gonna have one more tomorrow when it posts.
That's what I'm feeling. That's what I love to hear. You're getting a whole bunch of props in the chat. So definitely appreciate that. We've gotten that. It feels good to know that you're on our side, not that it's ever been doubted, but to see that in the list of sponsors. So with that, I just want to say a huge, huge, huge thank you to you. You have been a great influence both on this call and leading up to this and with the CLCPA passage. So everybody, please give your thanks in the chat. Shout out to Deputy Majority Leader Senator Gianaris for being here. If you can, stick around for the last Q&A that we have on the federal level. If not, we will see you sooner than later on our fight to pass the CCIA this year, 2021, not if, but when. So thank you so much. Kudos to you. I hope you have a great rest of the night and feel invigorated in the energy that we've co-created with the hundreds of people across New York State tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gio. Thank you, everyone on the call. Appreciate you.